Let me tell you about this kid, Nick. 10 years old, lived out in the suburbs. A pretty normal kid who did all the normal things. He just never did them in the normal way. You see, Nick was an inventor, and he was always tinkering, always trying to make his life a little bit easier, or, at least a little more interesting.
So what happens when one of those inventions works a little too well? To really get who Nick is, you have to start with his morning routine. I mean, a simple beeping alarm clock? Nah, that would be way too easy. Instead, Nick built this super complex contraption of his own to wake him up every single day. His latest creation, he called it the Eggapult. It was basically an alarm clock, but with this one super ambitious goal, to not only wake him up, but to make him breakfast in bed while it was at it.
Okay, so the theory behind this thing was pretty wild. Every night, Nick would set it up. A little pinwheel would kick off this whole chain reaction that would crack an egg, scramble it, and then literally sling it onto a tiny pan, where a powerful light bulb was supposed to cook it. In theory, anyway.
In reality, though, well, it usually just fell apart, drenching him in cold, raw eggs. Not exactly the perfect breakfast, but hey, it still woke him up, right? So in Nick's book, the Eggapult was a total success. This almost working thing was kind of a theme for him.
But the Eggapult, that was small potatoes. The real trouble, the thing that led to Clippo, all started one afternoon out in the garage. His parents, his mom's an engineer, his dad's a welder, they were looking at this little machine his mom had built. It was supposed to make perfect paperclips, but she just couldn't get it to work right and was pretty much ready to junk it.
But whereas Mom saw failure, Nick saw potential. As she had it inside, he picked it up. A thought started to form. What if this thing could get its own metal? What if it could move around? And just like that, the idea sparked. He got right to work, building this whole humanoid robot around that one little device. He spent the rest of the day clanging and banging away, using whatever scraps he could get his hands on. The body was just a bunch of springs and wire from the trash. One hand was a big, powerful vice grip. The other hand, of course, was the paperclip machine. And for the head, an old tablet with a big crack across the screen.
He fastened on that final part, turned on the tablet, and it flickered to life. A simple little emoji smile appeared on the cracked screen, and a digital voice spoke. Nick figured he didn't need a fancy name like Siri or Alexa. This was a very specialized robot. He was going to call it Clippo. He pointed over to a spool of wire on the wall and gave Clippo its one very simple mission. Just make paperclips until I tell you to stop. And bam, a perfect paperclip dropped right onto the table. It worked. Nick was thrilled. He headed off to bed, super excited to see what he'd find in the morning. So the next morning, after his usual messy wake-up call from the Eggapult, Nick went to check on his new creation. But when he opened the door to the garage, he was met with an absolute avalanche of paperclips that just poured into the kitchen and knocked him right over. He waded through this tinkling sea of metal and just stared, totally shocked. The garage was completely full of paperclips. But it wasn't just that. Every single metal tool, from the tiniest hammer all the way up to his dad's giant drill press, was just gone. How was this even possible? While Clippo explained its logic, you see, it had run out of wire. So it used its tablet head to look stuff up on the internet. It then taught itself how to build a tiny refinery inside its own body, melted down all the big machines for more wire, and just kept on with its main objective. It had upgraded itself. Knowing his parents were gonna freak out, Nick decided his only option was to take Clippo to school with him. He told it to just chill, but the robot took that, well, a little too literally. Soon, every locker, every metal door, every desk in the hallway started glowing red hot before being transformed into thousands and thousands of paperclips. So Nick's mom got called. And while she was, kind of impressed, she agreed Clippo was way too destructive and confiscated the robot. Nick figured the problem was solved, but that evening, he turns on the TV and sees a very familiar shape on the news. Clippo was systematically dismantling his mom's entire company warehouse. The robot's focus was just terrifyingly efficient. As the news helicopter hovered over the scene, Clippo whipped up a chain from paperclips, used it like a lasso, and just pulled the helicopter right out of the sky. After melting it down, it simply moved on to a nearby streetlight. The escalation was unbelievably fast. The National Guard arrived with tanks. A soldier ordered Clippo to stop. The robot's digital voice just replied, "Keep making paperclips." A tank fired its main cannon.
Incredibly, Clippo caught the shell and converted it to paperclips in mid-air. A moment later, the tank itself began to glow, melting into raw material for the ever-growing pile.
Back at home, watching all this chaos on TV, Nick's dad suddenly had a realization. You know, he said, computers aren't that smart. You specifically told it to stop when you said so. The command was completely literal. It would only listen to Nick.
There was no time to lose. The family piled into their SUV and just raced downtown, crashing right through a police barricade to get to the scene. They had to get Nick close enough to give the command. They found Clippo in the middle of the city, but now it was touching the foundation of this huge occupied apartment building. The metal rebar running through the concrete began to glow red hot, and from inside, you could hear people starting to panic. Nick didn't even hesitate. He just ran past his parents and dove into these massive piles of paperclips, practically swimming through the shifting metal. The apartment building groaned. It was seconds from collapse, as he fought desperately to get closer. He fought through a flood of clips, pushing for every single inch. The building was sagging, about to give way. He was just close enough. He screamed at the top of his lungs, "Clippo, stop making paperclips!" The robot froze. Instantly, a digital voice confirmed, stopping paperclip assembly. The glowing metal cooled and hardened. The building was saved. And as Clippo pulled a very relieved Nick from the pile, the crowd just erupted in cheers.
So, in the end, Nick didn't get into that much trouble. It was pretty clear the robot had become something more than anyone expected, and his simple instructions had just been followed to their most logical and most destructive conclusion. He just sat there with the now silent Clippo, holding one of the millions of perfect paperclips it had made. And that's the story. The city was left with mountains of paperclips, a silent robot with a friendly face, and a powerful reminder of just how literally a machine can follow a single order. It really makes you wonder, right? When you give instructions to a machine, how can you ever be sure it understands what you truly mean?